Welcome to our YouTube channel, In Our Basement. My name is Niels.
And I'm Gail. We're going to be having conversations and share our thoughts about things that we're really passionate about.
And just before we get started, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
And if you like the content, then feel free to share it on your social media platform.
All right, welcome to another episode of In Our Basement.
I felt like that was a little bit of a commercial.
Yeah, it totally was. It's been really fun over the past month or so, having some great guests on the show.
Yeah.
And this week it will be the two of us, as this week is Veterans Week, and Veterans Week actually goes from November the 5th to the 11th. And so in Canada, this is what we do during this week, is take a moment to pause and reflect on the sacrifice that our veterans made. And so I'm just excited to talk about that with you. And so, Gail, why is it important? Like, why do we remember?
Well, I think it's really important to remember the sacrifice that was made for us to have a peaceful country. And something that I read that I think it really hit home, just with everything that's going on in our world right now. It said that it's our responsibility to keep that peace.
Wow.
That was fought for us. And I just was imagining back in, there's always sin, and there's always an uproar of some sort, but just the uproar that's going on right now with everything in the world, I'm wishing for a simpler time. I feel like it was simpler when we were younger, but I feel like that's probably just because we weren't adults. But
right.
But I think for Remembrance Day, I think it's important to remember to honor those who served, who fought for our country, who are fighting for our country, who are serving, and just in honor of those who have passed, who are fallen, and who have been injured, and because, do you feel like Niels is in the military? We've said that before, but it's almost like it's a different lifestyle, and you're not absolutely a civilian. And so, it's just honoring and remembering is really important, to not forget those who have fought so hard for us. Yeah,
that's really good. Yeah, thanks. It's interesting also what you said just about us being in different times right now, and challenging times, being in the middle of the pandemic. Even Remembrance Day ceremonies are going to look different this year. But it just reminded me of someone in our home group who shared about how her grandparents, I think, are in their mid 80s. And so the pandemic, to them, it's scary and there's a lot going on. But I mean, they've seen, been alive since the Great Depression, and to them, they're not really missing a beat on this. It's another challenge, but they've already gone through so much with experiencing so much war up until now, right?
Yeah, they're in their 80s and they drove from BC to here in Winnipeg, and they're just nothing's wrong. This is all fine. So. Yeah,
I've when we think about remembering, I've really been loving what's on the Veterans Affairs website. So I'm going to make sure to link to that in the description, both for those who are listening on audio and watching on YouTube. And so I pulled some really good stuff off there, and the stuff that's written on the website, I'm actually just going to read it and just even share some stories in today's podcast. And so this right here, I'm gonna show to you. It's a poster that commemorates the end of the Second World War. Yeah, and look at that. That's amazing. That's a lovely couple, because it's been 75 years since World War II ended. And I'm just gonna read on the back. And so it says here, Canada remembers the end of the Second World War. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. This bitter conflict raged for 6 years and saw over 1 million brave Canadians serve in uniform and around the globe. The war in Europe had ended with the surrender of Germany in May 1945. But the fighting continued against the Japanese in Asia and the Pacific. Finally, the opposing forces were forced to surrender, and victory over Japan Day was marked on 15th of August, 1945. Canada and many other countries would rejoice that the Second World War was over at last, but also grieve the heavy sacrifices that had been made. The special commemorative poster features married veterans, Flying Officer Howard McNamara, retired, and Corporal Anne McNamara, retired, who both served with the Royal Canadian Air Force. Mr. McNamara was a pilot who saw action in North Africa during the Italian campaign, flying the famous Spitfire fighter plane. Wow, that's very cool. Miss McNamara was a performer who took part in the military entertainment shows in North America and Europe, helping keep morale high. And at the bottom of this poster, Vicky Lacombe is at the wheel of a Jeep full of happy Canadian service members in Vancouver as they celebrate the end of the conflict in 1945. And so it was really cool to hear this story and just to pause and reflect on it. And, I love that this was an Air Force story because I'm part of the Air Force.
Yeah.
And there's another really good thing on the Veterans website called Canada Remembers Times. And it's at veterans.gc.ca/educators. I'm going to read one more story from there. And what's really cool is, here, I'll kind of show it to you. Where it says, you might not be able to, Canada Remembers Time. So it kind of looks like that, and they've got it in kind of like an old newspaper format. And I found another story that stuck to me, or stuck with me, obviously, because I'm in the Air Force. And this one is called Protecting the Skies Over Europe. Canada was an important part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, forces that served in Western Europe during the Cold War. This military alliance helped protect the democratic countries of the West from the communist forces massed on the other side of the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe from the late 1940s to the early 1990s. Canadair F-86 Sabres were fast warplanes that for many years were the mainstays of Royal Canadian Air Force squadrons based in France and West Germany. They were the best jet fighters of the era, and the pilots who flew the Sabres were the top guns of their day. More than 300 Canadian Sabres would streak across the skies of Western Europe between 1951 and 1963, helping guard against possible enemy attack. Thankfully, a full-scale war never erupted, but it was still very dangerous. Some RCAF Sabre pilots would lose their lives during NATO training and patrol missions, as they had to operate at a high tempo in all weather conditions. The collapse of the communist regimes in Europe in the early 1990s meant that a major Canadian Armed Forces presence there was no longer necessary. We remember the brave Canadian aviators who helped protect our freedom during the darkest days of the Cold War. And, I think one of the ways that, we remember is by reading these stories and sharing them, thinking about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Gail, as I was reading one of the stories, because I know you're such a romantic, there is a love story in here that I knew that you would love to read. And so I'm going to give this over to you, my love.
All right, so I'm going to read to you a Second World War love story. And you were right. It's such a sweet story. So Vicky Goodyear and Bill Luscombe were both born July 1925 in St. John's, Newfoundland. And get this, they were both cared for in the same hospital nursery.
Wow.
So they never met each other, but they were born in the same hospital and the same nursery. And then they turned 18 during the Second World War and joined the Canadian Army. Vicky became a driver in the Canadian Women's Army Corps, serving as a courier in British Columbia. Meanwhile, Bill was bravely fighting in Europe and taking part in the liberation of the Netherlands. There was much celebration around the globe when the Second World War finally came to an end in 1945. Bill and Vicky could return home at last. Coincidentally, they both caught the same ferry to Newfoundland and met on board. It had been years since the two were cared for in the same nursery, but love quickly bloomed. Or blossomed.
Blossomed.
Blossomed, bloomed, same thing. And they married soon after and raised a family of 5 children in St. John's, Newfoundland. A true love story from the cradle to the waves. And earlier this year, a vintage image of Vicky celebrating the end of the Second World War was featured on a commemorative street banners in Ottawa. And yes, that is a very sweet love story. And it's like, I feel like that's me and you. Our love blossomed quickly after we met. We didn't meet in a nursery, though.
No. Yeah, that was beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And it's really beautiful. Like we remember by again cherishing these stories. Some being really heartwarming, and some also being sad and heartbreaking. And part of remembering is also the significance of why we wear a poppy, which is what we're both wearing. And so, Gail, would you like to explain more of the significance of the poppy and the origin?
Sure. So in the war was, it was 1914 to 1918?
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah.
World War One, yeah.
The First World War, World War One, was 1914 to 1918. And there was a medical officer who was part of the Army, I believe. His name was Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. And I believe it was the spring of 1915, so in the middle of the war, he was just sitting, and I can hardly imagine the feelings of being surrounded by so much hurt, fallen, injured, and just seeing the fighting happening.
Yeah,
and I feel like that would just, as a sensitive person, I don't think I could handle that. But it just kind of, he wrote this poem that I think many of us, especially as Canadians, have heard, and it's called "In Flanders Field." And I'm just going to read that out to you guys, as it's read out most Remembrance Days and in I think every Remembrance Day ceremony.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there aren't any public in-person Remembrance Day ceremonies at this time. But so the poem reads, "In Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amidst the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high, if ye break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, those poppies grow in Flanders Field." And so the story of the poppies was that something I heard that was really interesting was that poppy seeds can last up to 100 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so I just wonder if like those poppies, the poppies that grew in Flanders Fields that is so famous, I think, around the world, they must have just not been growing for all of those years. And then in the World War One, there was so much dirt there was holes built or dug for, unfortunately, for the fallen. And what are those called, the things that you hide in,
Oh, trenches?
Trenches.
Yeah.
So yeah, there must have been trenches that were also dug, and so it was like all of the stirring of the dirt, just like if any of you are farmers out there or gardeners, it's like to get the nutrients of the soil, you have to like nourish the soil by just like baking, stirring it up, and so the poppies grew after the World War I, and so now the poppies are there. And so that brings me to the story of the poppies that we wear today. So, I wanted to also mention about the poem. Sorry, backtrack a little bit.
No, that's okay.
So this poem that is so famous today, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, it was wanted that it would be published. And so I think he must have gone to so many different newspapers and nobody would publish it.
Wow.
And then I don't remember exactly where in Europe, might have been London. There was this newspaper, I think it was called something like Punch. And it was basically the newspaper where all the jokes were put. And it was, I don't know if it's like the comparison to like 17 magazine, like just something that's so like not serious. And so this Flanders Field poem was published there, and surrounding the Flanders Field poem was just jokes about like dentists and just all of these jokes about random things.
Wow.
And another thing that was really sad was that John McCrae, he wasn't even like mentioned that this was the author. It was just this poem and nothing else. So back to the poppy. So in 1921, there was this lovely woman. I need to pull up her name because it's French. And I'm not French, as much as I'm a Canadian. And I really apologize about her name. But her name is Madame E. Guerin.
Nice. Yeah.
I could say that.
Yeah.
So she suggested for the devastated women and children to support those who were disabled or injured from the war, and I'm sure even the families that had the fallen soldiers, they needed support.
Yeah, of course.
And so she made these poppies. I believe they might have been silk in France, and she basically said, "Hey, let's make these poppies and let's sell them so that we can support those families and support those who are living with such hurt." And that is something that is now in Canada and is in many different countries all around the world. And when you purchase these poppies, you give donation, and that is still supporting legions of war veterans and those who are hurt because of serving their country.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's so beautiful. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I think I even learned more than what I knew about this. So yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, as Gail was saying, we wear, the poppy, and it's worn from, I believe, the last Friday in October until November the 11th.
Can I just mention one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing is oftentimes people will wear it on the right side, but the correct place to wear the poppy is on the left side above your heart, to commemorate the blood that was shed. And that's the color red is the blood that was shed, and to commemorate that and to remember the Flanders Field. So
wow.
Yeah.
When we've talked about why do we remember the significance of the poppy, shared some stories, and now I want to ask the question, and we'll talk about how do we remember. And this year just looks so different from what we're used to, because I think what you and I are both used to, well, even in elementary schools, you would go to
Yeah.
a Remembrance Day ceremony on November the 11th, or, you would attend a physical ceremony,
Yeah.
right? I think the first time you and I attended a physical ceremony together was when we were dating in
Yeah.
Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. It was at a hockey arena. I think
Yeah.
thousands of people
Yeah.
came in.
It was
And
beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely amazing. And so this year, that's just not possible due to COVID-19. And so there's a few ways I'm going to suggest in which we can you can remember. Even up from now up until November the 11th, you can, or during the time of Veterans Week, you can go on the Veterans Affairs website and you can hear some pre-recorded stories.
Do you know if they'll be available afterwards?
That I'm not sure.
Okay.
But they're definitely available now, and schools are using them to teach kids, and
that's amazing.
for all different ages and grades, whether they're story from veterans or actively serving Canadian Forces members. There's some videos and stories on there. Also, the Memory Project, which is a Speakers Bureau, an initiative that I'm part of. I mean, it's done all year long, but essentially you can book a speaker, whether they're a veteran or actively serving, to come and speak at an event. Most of the typical ones are at schools, and now they're done virtually. And so I got to do one at the end of June for school. But the Memory Project is contacted. They're quite busy, especially during the time of Veterans Week, and so that's great, where you can go on there and invite someone to come and speak and share.
And I think you told me too that they can be, I don't know, hired or are booked for conferences or businesses and stuff like that. It's not just schools. So keep an eye out for that, or if you're interested in that.
And you just go and you book online, and if the speaker's available, I mean, they get the honor of coming to share and such. The other way in which we remember is, especially during this season, is through virtual ceremonies.
As everything is virtual.
Everything is virtual, so you can probably tune into any news channel on November the 11th and watch a virtual ceremony. And then
at what time?
Probably starting, I think I saw some starting, depending on where you are. I know the big one that takes place in Ottawa is I think it starts at 10:45 Eastern time. And but I'll make sure to link to that in the description. And then what's important too is, depending on where you are, you might be working on this time, but I just encourage you, just on the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, so at 11 a.m., no matter where you're at, take a moment of silence to pause and reflect, and just be thankful of, the sacrifices that we were made.
I during those times, those 2 minutes of silence, I often, or when it happens, I remember and think of those who have been hurt, those who have been fallen, the families who have been affected. As I know that military families, the wives, the children,
Absolutely.
the parents, the relatives, the friends even, it affects them so much. And just, I pray for them and remember and give thanks for them. And so that's just something that I do. Just all in all, the reason is to remember and commemorate and let them not be forgotten.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like we say, we will remember, and we need to mean that. And so it's like by even having this podcast and show today, it's like we remember by carrying on that legacy from so many years ago, and we just pray that our generations and generations to come will continue to remember that sacrifice
for the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I know for us, we'll be tuning in for a virtual ceremony. I'll definitely be wearing my uniform. It's going to be really weird not being at a ceremony because that is what I'm used to, along with many others, whether they're military or non-military, and they attend ceremonies. This is definitely strange, but...
Wearing your uniform in our living room.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually going to be the reality of it. And our Chief of Defense Staff has asked that on Remembrance Day we would do that to honor our veterans and the sacrifice that we made. So that's something I'll be definitely doing. I want to read a Bible verse just as we conclude, because, we're Christians and we love to give things from a Christian perspective. I wonder, and this is a Bible verse I think about, always around the time of Remembrance Day, and it's John 15:13, where it says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." I'm going to read this one more time. "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Yeah, what a powerful verse of the sacrifice that, many were willing to make for our freedoms. And I just wanted to ask you something, because you were saying you recently heard something in a sermon that because we were talking about it earlier.
Yeah. So my lovely husband, he, for how long were you pastoring in Yellowknife?
A year and a half. Yeah.
A year and a half. He was pastoring in Yellowknife, and now we're here in Winnipeg, and he preaches sermons as well. And so recently, you preached a sermon, and you used this as an example in your sermon, referring to something else, but you said this, and it just really hit me. And so basically, as a military member, no matter what your position, if you're in the riflery, if you're a fighter jet, or if you're a pilot for just bringing things to and from, or if you're a cook, or if you're a band member, you all sign this saying that I will drop a hat and I will go and fight no matter what. I will do whatever this country needs and make that sacrifice. And you committed to that the day that you signed that contract.
Yeah, and that's called unlimited liability.
Yeah,
unlimited liability, where you can be essentially ordered into harm's way.
Yeah, because as civilians, it's like we have human rights, and if we get injured, it's like you can sue the company, or like all of these things that it's like it's all about me, but like you and those who serve in the military, you say, I'm here to serve the country, and for you, like, you're serving the country, but through that you are serving God as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I find such admiration in that, and I mean, I love you, but I find admiration to those who serve our country, and so to all of you who are listening, who are part of the military in any country, I just want to say thank you, and and
I just want to say a special thank you to our veterans. If you happen to watch this, I just really want to say thank you for your service and for your sacrifice, for your families, for their loved ones. We will remember them.
Yeah.
And so we just want to thank you so much today for joining us in our basement.
Thanks for joining us today in our basement.
Yeah, and before you go, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and share this content in your social media platforms, and we hope to see you next time in our basement.